Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's that time of year again. Yes, it's tax time if you live here in the United States, which is a great time to complain about how high taxes are and how much money is wasted by the government. But it's also a great time for me, at least, to stop and reflect on the conditioning that people have relative to taxes, both in their thoughts and in their actions. We have a thing here in the United States, and now this is going to be a American-centric video, so you have to think about how this maybe relates to your country if you're not in the United States. But I think most Western countries have some version of this taxation system, which is you have an income tax, which means all the wages that you earn, you have to give some portion of that to the government. And the way we do it here is we have what's called withholding, which means before you even get your money, the money that the government says is our money is taken out by your employer and sent to the government. So you get only a portion of what you actually earned. And in reality, when you look at your pay stub, and here in the United States, we have lots of little lists like, oh, this is going to go to Social Security, this is like FICA, this is income tax, this is state income tax. I live in a state that has additional state income tax. And you look at all those and you're like, man, I guess I'm paying some taxes. But because it's never in your hands and you never have the ability to spend it on something, to go buy something with it or to invest it, you never really think of the value that's missing. You can't really value that which you've never had. So it's an interesting thought. Now, there's actually more, by the way, that's not even on that list, including payroll taxes, right? Your employer pays payroll taxes on your behalf. And if you're like, well, payroll taxes tax the company. Remember, corporations are not people. Companies are not people. They're ideas. They're ways of, sort of collecting resources. So only people pay taxes. And from a company's perspective, there's merely the cost of a worker. The cost of having somebody do a job that you'd like them to do costs X amount. And it doesn't matter whether it's 80% wages and 20% tax, or it's 50-50 tax and wages, or if it's all wages or it's all tax. It doesn't matter to the company. What only matters is that it costs a certain amount to get a person. So their payroll tax, that's really money that should be paid to you because that's part of the cost of your employment. So there's an extra, 6 to 12%. I think it's 12%, 12.5%. Somebody who's a tax expert will correct me, I'm sure. But you don't even see that. That goes off and isn't even on your paycheck. So imagine if you had just 1 year or even a couple of months. If you did just 1 month, you might even have this effect. You stopped having withholding. You stopped doing withholding taxes for a year, and you made people pay that in April. Now, if you're self-employed like me, you do this every year anyway. You write a check out to the government. I have to save for taxes. I have to put money aside in order to pay the tax on it at the end of the year. So everybody has to write a check to the federal government, whether you're like rich or poor. You have to do your taxes and then write a check. How quickly would the tax system be drastically altered? You might have a revolution overnight because of the immense burden and the fact that every single person would be like pegged with this particular burden of paying taxes. Or you'd have so many people be unable to pay their taxes because of how they've been conditioned to spend the little money that you give them, that the government would collapse and have to be reorganized within a very short amount of time because you just couldn't get the tax. The IRS is not big enough to go out and collect delinquent taxes from 200 million people. It's way beyond its current capacity. So you'd have a drastic altering of it overnight. And there's big reasons why they don't do that. Like the Republicans, for all their talk, they could easily, destroy the government system and rebuild it in a much smaller fashion if they just stopped withholding for even like a month and made people pay that at the end of the year. You'd have a significant change in the political climate because people would have something and understand the value of it or have spent it, and now they're in debt to the government, and that's going to create a lot more resentment. It's going to change the mindset quite a bit. People have been conditioned to think of what they get after taxes as theirs because they never had the money that's taken out from taxes. So I think that's an interesting sort of thought experiment. You might also have local governments might all have a boon of money because people would go out and spend their money and pay their 6 to 10%, 12% sales tax on everything that they buy. That value added tax that is all local in the United States. So it's majority local and state. You'd have a big boon to the states and to the local governments. They'd have a lot of extra resources to be able to do things in their communities. It'd be a really weird change. And I think it'd be it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't think it's going to happen, though, because I think Republicans are just as interested as Democrats in holding on to the ring of power that is all that tax money and portioning it out to people that have given them favors or paid for their campaigns and things. That's kind of the way politics works here in the United States, and it really is quite unfortunate that it works that way, but that is how it works. There's pork barrel spending, all kinds of other things. So really quickly, you'd have people valuing, like, how much does my taxes actually pay for that I'm paying for right now? And you'd have people really think about it, because most of the things that you have people, complain about with taxes, like roads, is like, that's not even paid for by federal income taxes. That's all local and state stuff. Roads, like schools, like, no, that's local. Like almost everything that impacts your life is done locally or at the state level. And the federal government, for all the money it hoovers up, does almost nothing for you. If you're young and you pay Social Security tax, you're not going to see any of that. Social Security system, if you're a millennial, will be completely bankrupt and empty by the time you get to collect on it. Or there'll be so little money that when they send you a check, it'll be for like $100, and $100 will be enough to buy you like 2 candy bars in the future. So Social Security, if you're young, you need to be doing completely separate saving and investing, because the Social Security system really can't continue the way it's been run. So there's really nothing the federal government does that impacts people's life on a daily basis. There's this huge bloated military that doesn't protect you from invasion, that just tends to spend its time out in other countries. People think a lot more critically about all the functions of government. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Likewise, when I think about the way people have been conditioned, it's a long time coming, and it's very intentional. So at one point there was no income tax. The federal government was not funded by income tax or capital gains tax or any of this kind of stuff. 1911 is when, I think it's 1911, is either 1909 or 1911 that income tax became a thing. And it wasn't until the 1920s that any significant portion of the population paid income tax. And by significant portion, I mean like 10 or 20%. And it wasn't until after you created the Social Security system where you could put a number on every man, woman, and child, like stamped on their forehead like the mark of the beast, to track where they go, so that they're paying into this system when you can figure out where they are and what they're doing and who they are, and just take their money before they get it. It wasn't until all of those systems became in place that you were able to just graft the money before people even got it. Like it's a big revolution. Back in Roman times, the tax collector would have to go around and take people's money by force. Now it's like, well, taxes aren't taken by force because I've never even seen them. They're taken out before you even seen your money. So the idea that taxes are taken by force is foreign to many people's mind, because they're like, of course it's not taken by force. I never even had the money to begin with. It just went straight to the government. So prior to that, the federal government was funded through things like, import and export duties and taxes, things coming into ports. In fact, that was one of the reasons that the North had the Civil War, is that they, a lot of their tax money came from the ports of the South, and the federal government wasn't going to be able to fund itself without some of the southern states. One of many reasons. So it's interesting to think about with all of that, where we're at and how we got here, and how could you undo it? Well, I've talked about some ways in the past, but the short answer is that it's going to have to kind of undo itself, I think. It's interesting to think about. So leave me your thoughts about income taxes and things like that down below. It's a very interesting topic. What thought experiments have you run about, like, what if this didn't happen? What if this thing didn't happen? What do you think the result would be? That's how I write a lot of stories. Like, I think that's a great way to approach a science fiction story. What if you couldn't do this? Then what would happen? What would be the result? So I'll talk to you guys next time. And I do read the comments, although I don't respond as much as I used to because there's just so many comments. So I promise you I read them. If you want my more direct attention, send me an email, stu@davidvstewart.com, or post on the Facebook page, facebook.com/davidvandykestewart, or on Patreon, patreon.com/davidvstewart. I try to pay attention to all those chats, and of course, like the new community tab on YouTube, which is a fun little thing. So I'll see you guys next time, and you guys have a great day.